What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is episode 131, and we are covering the pros and cons of the PPL or push-pull legs training split. Before we dive into today's topic, as always, Bryan, can you kick us off with some updates, please?
Yeah, this week, I think the updates are going to be much better than last week. So I've been lamenting in the prior week or two about the different bouts of sickness that I've come down with. 2 weeks ago, it was GI distress. And then last week, it was a fever with chills and all that sort of stuff. And this week, I feel fantastic. So really, really happy about that. It seems like it's happening at just the perfect time too, because I am officially 4 days out from my bike race. So today is Tuesday. The race is on Saturday. And I guess by the time this episode comes out next Tuesday, I will have already finished it. So yeah, kind of weird the way these things deliver like that. But I'm getting really excited. I think that I am primed with recovery. I think I overreached slightly, as I discussed last week. I think that I'm now not overreached anymore. All the metrics are back to normal, but it took a while. So it's been now 10 days since I got the fever, chills, sickness thing the prior weekend. And it took until Friday, so 4 or 5 days, for my resting heart rate to return back to normal. It was elevated after the sickness, initially about 15 beats for a day or two. And then it was, 8 to 10 beats for a day or two. And then it was like 5 beats for a day. And then finally on Friday, it normalized and was back into the low 40s. My HRV, however, took even longer. So the HRV number was artificially low for 7 days after the sickness. And it wasn't until Sunday, so 2 days ago, that my HRV finally returned back to normal readings. So definitely, I think a combination of getting sick, but also a little bit of overreaching, which ultimately I'm okay with, because when you overreach, you supercompensate. And I feel like that's kind of what has happened to me. This week now, we're in the final stretch before the race. And I just kind of want to quickly go over my plan for anyone that might find it interesting. So Sunday, which was 6 days out, I did a lift session, but did not bike. Monday, which was yesterday, I did a easy zone 2 ride, basically an hour at 130 beats per minute. So it wasn't even zone 2, it was like low zone 2. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of intensity. You kind of want one intense workout in there, but it's relatively far away from the race. So today I'm going to do 3 intervals, where usually I might do 4 or 5 intervals. So I'm pulling the lever of decreasing volume, but keeping a little bit of intensity in there, which actually aligns pretty well with the research on powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting or strength sport or something like that, where you generally want to dial volume back, but keep intensity up. Kind of similar idea here with the bike race. However, since the bike race is not an event that is born in intensity, it's an event that is born in volume, given that it's going to be about a 3.5-ish hour race for me. I don't want to completely pull back on the volume, because I need to make sure that my legs are still fresh and feel good. But you want to come back enough that you can kind of get that super compensation effect and make sure that you are, optimally recovered for the race. So we're on Tuesday now. I'm going to do a little bit of intensity. Tomorrow, Wednesday, I'm just going to do a full body lift session that's not too intense at all. Probably almost like something between like a deload and an actual work week. Thursday, I'm going to do another zone 2 ride, about an hour or so at about 130 to 135 beats per minute. And then Friday, we drive up to, the Utah-Colorado border for the race. And I will probably do like a 20 or 30 minute easy spin once we get there in the evening, just to kind of shake the legs out after the long drive. And then we race on Saturday. So the race is at 2:30, which I'm a little bummed about. There's a 100 mile and a 200 mile race as well that use the same course as our 50 mile race. We're essentially just the last 50 miles of the 200 mile race. So the 200-mile race is starting at like 6 a.m. The 100-mile race is starting at like 10 a.m. And then we're starting at 2:30. So not my best time to ride. I much prefer the mornings, but it is what it is. I'll be excited. And the plan there to fuel is mostly to just eat a bunch of food leading up to it, given that it's at 2:30. I don't think I need to go crazy with carbohydrate loading the night before or anything like that. I'm just going to eat pretty normal, but skew to carbohydrates throughout the day, and then have my hydration pack for the race. I'm going to bring my 3-liter pack instead of my 2-liter, put my Gatorade a little bit away, bring a bottle of water and a bar. And that should be more than enough to kind of fuel me through. And then as far as goals, when I initially started this race started preparing for it back in very early winter 2023, maybe even I think we signed up for it in early February or something like that. So it's been about 9 months. Initially, my goal was to beat 6 hours. Now I'm at a point where I think that on a great day, if all the conditions go well and I don't flat and I don't get stuck in a pack with a bunch of people slowing me down, I think that maintaining 15 miles per hour throughout the entire duration on gravel with 2,500 feet of climbing would be my goal. So 50 miles at 15 miles per hour, that would put me at 3 hours and 15 minutes or something along those lines. And that would be my high end goal. Like if everything goes right, I think I can hit about 3 hours and 15. If I can beat 3.5, I'll be happy. And then anything over 3.5, I think means that something went wrong. So I will report back and let you guys know exactly how long this thing takes me. But that's where I stand at the moment. And then I have one more really quick update. Any thoughts on any of that before I jump into it?
I do. The biggest one being next week, assuming that we can record and stuff, post and everything settled. I would love to do like a race recap episode. I'm sure I'm going to, have a million questions about things, and I think it would be really fun to talk about. But I think it was pretty wild how your goal essentially got cut in half in terms of got cut in half from a duration, or your performance goal increased by what is effectively 100%, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, that is interesting. I think part of it is a matter of what I thought the terrain was. So I don't think my fitness improved by double per se, but I thought that we were signing up for like a half mountain bike, half gravel race, and mountain bike terrain is going to be much slower because it's single track and it's a little more technical. Yeah. But once I found out it was gravel, I think that would have changed my number to 4.5 or 5 hours, but still going from 4.5 to 5 hours down to 3.5 hours is still, 25, 30, 35% improvement. So yeah, it's been a crazy journey of seeing things improving fitness and just getting better at biking in general, Yeah, very cool. Cool. So final update here. Actually, it's a combined update. The good news is my body weight is back climbing. At the end of this sickness thing that I had, I saw a 180.6. And 180.6 is the lowest number I would have seen since I did the men's physique competition in 2015 when we were part of CrossFit PB. And that was when I was so depleted. I'd lost all my strength. I hired that awful coach that screwed me up and everything. And so I hit 180 was my low number for that. And I hit 180 again here, which is just insane to me. I'm back up to 185 today. So I've been eating so much the last 4 days. I've literally been stuffing myself. I've been having 200 plus grams of protein, endless amounts of carbs, just as much food as I can stuff in my face. Finally back to 185. I think part of that is why I feel so good right now, is getting food back in my body. But on Sunday, I had my final hard full body workout before, my kind of taper workout on Wednesday. And so I did a bunch of the movements that I was doing a number of months ago before my body weight really started plummeting. So I was basically in the 190s, the low 190s during this time. And I wanted to compare where my strength is now on Sunday, I was 181 or 182. Where was it at the end of the deficit, where I'm as depleted as I could be compared to where it was when I was still doing a lot of cardio, but my body weight was holding on. I was, all things considered, I was recovered and doing well. So I did my hack press with the 3-second pause at the bottom. I did my leg curls with the lengthened setup. I did some dual cable lateral raises and a couple other movements. And basically across the board, I was 1 or 1.5 reps weaker now than I was a number of months ago with my body weight higher. And it was really reassuring because I still could throw the same exact weight onto that hack press, this daunting, hard, compound lengthened movement. And I got 4.5 reps, and my all-time PR is 6 at the same weight. And it was really reassuring because I feel like once I go back to eating more food, once I cut the cardio volume back, it really shouldn't be hard at all for me to gain back that rep or that 1.5 reps on most of these movements. And so I see that happening in the first week or two. And then from there, it's just being able to progress forward. And it almost feels as if by moving backwards a step or two, in some ways, it's given me a renewed excitement and vigor to train again with weights and regain and push forward and kind of exceed boundaries. And I don't know if I don't know how it's going to play out. Like, it may get to the point where I get my 6 reps and then I'm just stuck and I'm like, oh, guess that's my genetic ceiling, never going to get above 6 reps here. But my sense is that because I've been depleted and because I've been doing all this cardio, that once I go back to prioritizing weights, that I should be able to get to that boundary and then push beyond it. And that's kind of reinvigorated me and made me excited to kind of get back to training again. And my new cycle is going to be a PPL, which is kind of the basis for why we're doing this episode. So let's jump into your updates, and then we'll get into kind of the structure of my cycle and some of the pros and cons of PPL overall.
Yeah, let's do it. So I only have one update this week, and I cannot remember if I covered it on the podcast or not, but last week at the beginning of the week, like, everything kind of came to a head for me. I went in to train legs, and my desire was low. Like, I was almost kind of not beside myself, but I remember thinking like, fuck dude, it's Monday and I need this gnarly leg session by myself. And I'm like, I just don't want to fucking do it. Like, I remember, like, I just do not want to do it. So I get in and I'm like, the leg press is like the first exercise, and I'm loading it up, and my typical working weight that I've been using, 4 plates per side on it. And I'm warming up and I'm like, there's no fucking way today. I was like, I'm going to back down to 3.5 and just do that today. And what I had done the previous week, or my best for on my first set, was 4 plates per side for 12. That was like my top. And then I think I went like 11 and 9 or 11 and 10 or something like that on the second and third set. I'm down whatever from 4 plates per side to 3.5 plates per side. I get pinned. I fail a rep at rep 11. It like pins me at the bottom of the leg press, and I have to like roll out. Then what I ended up doing is like tweaking my knee a little bit at how it like pinned me in there. But I was like, Jesus Christ, and I had to like pull all the weight off and like, push it back up, load it up. And then like the reps were just poor, right? They were just poor. It did not go well. And then I go into the hack squat, and like at the bottom, unweighted, I can feel it. It's like pulling on the inside of my knee, kind of like in the VMO adductor. And I was like, I'm proud of myself that I was smart and just didn't try and push through it. But I was like, I'm going to move on. Then my hip was bothering me, and I eventually, I did some leg extensions and leg curls and like really shooed the day and was like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. I feel terrible. Got home, like reached out to Jackson, who's my coach. I'm like, listen, like I'm beat the fuck up, right? Like I can feel it. My desire to train is low, like blah, blah, blah. So okay, cool. Take 3 days off, right? Take 3 complete days off. Cause prior to this, I hadn't had a single day off where I did no training or cardio in literally months. And it was like, and then we're going to refeed, right? So 2 back-to-back high day of refeeds, took off Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, went in Friday, and like my will to train, lo and behold, came like rocketing back. Had a wonderful pull session Friday, wonderful push session on Saturday. We come into legs again on Monday, yesterday. I go in, we're warming up, things feel pretty decent. I load up that 4 plates per side, 15 reps.
Damn, that's what we call over
reps.
compensation, super compensation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was wild because literally a week before I had on, literally a half a plate less on each side and got pinned at 11 and then come in and hit literally 15.
Yeah.
And then had to go up because I overshot the rep range. So then my second and third set were at 4.5 plates. So it was very, very, just a very stark contrast of literally a week apart. And just when your body's telling you things and like, you're kind of run down, like we kind of touched about it on last week. It's a fine line, especially with the mental game of like, am I just being mentally weak, or like, am I overreached? Is performance dog shit? Is it time to like really pull back? And for me, it really, really was. In just those 3 days, I literally did nothing but work. I like came in, I still had my meals and stuff. Obviously, I had a lot more with the refeeds. I worked. I didn't leave the fucking house. I just like hung out and watched. I watched an anime series, which was very great. It's called Dororo, by if anyone's interested. It was a short one, which was nice too. And just fucking recovered and slept. And then 3 days later, I felt worlds better. And now I'm back in that's PR. Like that's literally the best I have done. And now I think we're in week 11 of my diet. And that was just a massive like press PR. So
That's amazing, dude. Very cool. I think that, you and I both discussed this last week too, but we're both on this trend line of pushing the boundaries of what we can recover from in our respective pursuits. And we both literally hit the exact same kind of stopping point where our bodies was like, nope, you guys need a break almost at the exact same time. And, I took 2 days and I was sick and I just watched football and sat on the couch and slept and did nothing, averaged 3,000 steps a day. And you had more or less a similar experience in your case. And then we both came back and now we're both feeling better, performing better. Very cool to see that happen. I know I've read plenty of research on the idea of overreaching and supercompensation, but I don't know that I've ever actually overreached myself. I was on Jordan's podcast yesterday. I don't know when it's going to come out, but we were discussing this, and we were discussing the difference between how you can so easily reach these kind of overreaching signs with cardio. Like you can get the acute response of resting heart rate being elevated, HRV being down. You can have these like really real feelings of, being depleted and not being recovered sufficiently. And we were talking about how we just haven't really gotten there with weights. And we were talking about how much weightlifting you would have to do to get your body to that place. And we were lamenting about how neither of us have ever gotten a 15 beat elevated resting heart rate or completely disrupted sleep patterns the way that we would from excessive cardio from weights. And we were just kind of theorizing on how much weightlifting it actually would take to get to that point. And so you are the example of pushing the weightlifting boundary there. And it's really cool to me that we have this coming from the cardio angle and from the weight angle respectively, and kind of meeting in the middle here at the same time frame too.
Yeah. And one thing I didn't say, but it did happen, is my weight plummeted as well.
Yeah.
Like I had the prior week, I dropped like 2.3 pounds on average, so then like my average was like 205.4 or something last week. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I was all in the 202s. So like another 2 pounds down under that previous average.
Yeah.
So that did happen. And that's when I was like, something's going on. Like weight just is cratering. I feel horrible. I don't want to train. So yeah.
Same thing, dude. Yeah. I mean, I was 5 pounds down as well. So yeah, it's wild. 185 back today. So I feel like everything's going to be okay. Woosah.
Yeah. Cool. So let's dive in. I think what's wonderful is I am on a modified push-pull legs, which we talked about on I think it was 2 episodes ago, the Q&A.
We also talked about it on the training camp episode.
That was it. Yes, that was it. But a lot of these same things are going to apply, but push-pull legs it's kind of like a staple, right? It for a very long time, I think if you push came to shove and you said, Aaron, what's your favorite training split? I would still say push-pull legs, but I think it's, again, like everything we try and cover on Eat Train Prosper, there's a lot of nuance and things that can go into it, and that's what we're going to dive into here now.
Yeah, I think so I made an announcement on my story couple weeks ago that the new split I'm going to be embarking on after my bike race is going to be a PPL. And I haven't done a PPL. I was looking back at my logs. I haven't done one since 2020. I hired Bryan Miner, as you guys probably will know Bryan as the progressive overload guy from back in that day. Now works with 3DMJ. But I hired Bryan as my coach in 2020, and I was doing a PPL split at the time. And that was during the period of time where volume was the main driver of hypertrophy. And that's what the coaches were promoting because that's what the literature stated. And I remember I went to Bryan and I was doing my PPL split over 10 days, the way that I'm structuring it now. And we'll get into kind of the different ways you can structure it. But basically, I was structuring it as push, pull, rest, legs, rest, and then repeat with 5 new days. So basically push, pull, rest, legs, rest. So there's a rest day before and after each leg day with the 2 upper body days back to back as long as scheduling allows. And then you would have another 5 days, 3 training days where you'd have different movements. So that's one thing that I would actually call a pro for me of the PPL split is that you get these kind of 2 different mini microcycles, if you want to call them that, where instead of just doing the same 3 days and then the same 3 days and then the same 3 days, and it feels like you're kind of just beating your head against the wall, you have these 2 iterations of it. So you have a 3-day PPL and then a 3-day PPL with different movements. So anyway, that's how I was organizing it when I started with Bryan. Bryan looked at that and goes, hey, I think if we cut out one of those rest days, we can get more gains. And I was a bit hesitant at the time because I was like, this is working for me on my recovery curve. But he wanted to cut it out and do it over 8 days instead of over 10 days. And so I did. And actually, I probably did get slightly better results doing it that way. But it burnt me out. And I felt unmotivated after a couple months to continue training that way. And so now as we get into my new PPL split, it's going back to the 10-day cycle because that's just what I personally feel is the best kind of recovery curve for me. However, since I posted about this, I've been getting a ton of questions in DMs, really good questions from people with really insightful kind of perspectives on the PPL split. And one of the big ones that I keep getting is how the frequency per muscle group there seems to be some disparity in the PPL split between when a muscle recovers and when it's trained again. And so what I mean by that is if we're doing a 3-day PPL split over a 5-day period, that may be perfect for legs. Like they may recover on that recovery curve where you're at day 3 or 4 and you're like, finally the soreness is gone. I feel recovered. I feel like I could, match or exceed performance again. But is that the case for the other muscle groups? And so that's the first kind of thing I want to delve into here is discussion around the recovery curve of individual muscle groups and kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very valid point. And I think from a con or a criticism of it, I think it's warranted. But it's a challenge, right? The only way to really mitigate that, in my opinion, is you need a very, very custom, template, or not necessarily template, program designed for yourself or from someone who's collecting like a very, very high amount of information. But I also want to point out that like you should also be quite advanced in your training, age and in result of your physique or whatever, maybe if strength is a more important factor for you to like kind of warrant that. I do think it's something that people sometimes kind of like put the carriage before the horse sort of thing. And they're like, try and micromanage too small of details. But I'm like, listen, you've put on like 10 pounds of muscle. We have a lot of room to grow with like the basics of before really getting nuanced sort of. But I do think it's very, very warranted, especially the last part on it is we all have like, for example, my legs used to recover pretty well because I'd never really learned how to train them like as good as I could train like my back or my chest. So of course, when you're putting less stimulus into something, it's obviously going to get less fatigued and then will therefore recover better. And that's another caveat to bring up there is that there is like the asterisk of, well, if your back's taking really long to recover, well, that's a bad example. If your hamstrings are taking really long to recover because you connect with them really, really well, but like your quads don't, for example, like that would be an example. Me of a couple of years ago, like, is it really the recovery or is it an execution sort of thing? So there's kind of more ways to skin that proverbial cat there.
Yeah. I guess when I'm looking at it, you kind of accept that there's going to be certain muscle groups that are going to recover faster than others. And you build out the program so that the muscle that recovers slowest is able to recover before it's being trained again. And so in this case of the PPL split, I think for me, for you, and for many people, the legs are just going to be the one that needs to be paced to, because they tend to be trained with these, lengthened compound movements that tend to cause a bunch of muscle damage. As a quick example, on Sunday when I did my hack press full body training session, I only did 2 top sets for hack press and 2 top sets for seated leg curl, and then some upper body stuff. Nothing on my body got sore except my quads and my hamstrings. And literally I did 2 top sets of each. So 4 total sets for legs. And my quads, even today now, today's Tuesday and that was on Sunday, they were really sore yesterday. They're still sore today. And I think that they wouldn't clear the soreness until Wednesday, which means I wouldn't want to train them again until Thursday at the earliest. And that's from 2 sets of hack squat. When I'm designing my PPL split, given that there's a leg day and it's not a full body day, I plan on doing more than 2 sets of quads. And so I'm going to need that significant amount of time to recover before I can actually train my legs effectively again. So with that said, you understand that there's going to be some muscle groups that are going to recover before the legs are recovered. Like we'll go into the specific muscle groups and things like that and what we can do about it as we get going. But the thing that you have to keep in mind here is that just because a muscle isn't sore anymore or is recovered doesn't mean that you have to train it again. We know that maintenance volume is super low. And I'm not trying to say that we're just putting some muscle groups on maintenance and other ones become the priority. But it's not the end of the world if you train your back really hard and then 2 days later it feels recovered and you feel like you could train it again, but you don't. You're just building up these reserves so that it's got extra then down the road. And you don't know if maybe there's even more benefit to training a muscle group, not right when it's recovered, but maybe giving it an extra day or two to sort of, I don't know if super compensate is the right word, but to really get full recovery and get increased motivation to train that muscle group again, and then give it more each time. So there's a couple caveats there. Worst case scenario though, you're not going to go backwards on any muscle groups because they're trained every 5 days instead of every 3 or 4 days. Like there's just no way you're going to go backwards. You could even do a bro split where you're not training back but once a week and you could still be fine and make progress on your back. And so while I understand that that is a valid criticism that some muscle groups are going to recover faster and hit their optimal like recovery curve, so to speak, while others might be a little bit delayed or recover faster, and be ready to train earlier, that doesn't mean that you have to train them. So yeah, any thoughts on any of that?
No, I mean, it's very valid. I think things are moving kind of backwards again, like how the pendulum shifts in the industry and trends and stuff. But like I was someone who I drilled that frequency and I thought that was the answer, and I'm sure the listeners are picking up on it at this point. Like I eat my words kind of semi-regularly. But like I ran a bro split from literally January until mid-June this year or mid-July. And I made arguably some of the best gains that I have made in like the last 4 or 5 years this year, running of like I trained my quads once, and then I literally trained them every Monday and that was it. But I made really, really good progress. But they were recovered by about Friday, but I still would, Saturday, Sunday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I mean, I wouldn't obviously train them and you don't have to. There's always going to be like trade-offs and it would be nearly impossible to create some program that had things recovered or trained again precisely as they recover. You'd end up with a very wonky split with a lot of technical detail, and you'd probably get lost in the sauce of configuration and analysis paralysis hell on it.
Yeah, that's actually exactly where I wanted to go next with this conversation, because if you guys recollect that have been following the podcast for a while, I literally designed my last split before I took on all this biking and cardio with that in mind. And so my split was, as Aaron said, this wonky thing where it was like lateral delts were trained on 3 or 4 different days. Back was trained in some capacity on 3 or 4 different days, and legs were trained every 4th or 5th day, with chest every 4th or 5th day, as well as, chest tends to take a lot of damage for me. And so if you're going to go out on a limb and try to design a split that matches your individual recovery curve perfectly, then yeah, it's going to look kind of weird. And the truth is that you could actually take a PPL split and you could sort of mangle it and maneuver it into one of these more personalized type approaches. It wouldn't be super hard to, when you're looking at the way I designed it with PP rest, legs rest, push pull legs rest, legs rest. Basically you could just take some lateral delt work off of upper body push day, and you could put a little bit of onto leg day or onto back day. You're already getting some rear delt work with your back work anyway. You could easily throw some lateral delts on there. If your back is recovering really fast, you could take some back work and you could throw that onto your leg day. Maybe, you throw some back work on chest day, you throw some lateral delt work on back day, and then you put a rest day between those 2 days instead of, before and after the leg day. So now it almost might look like push plus a little bit of back work, rest, then back, or pull rather, with a little bit of lateral delt work, and then rest, and then leg day. And then you could rotate right back into push day again. So you just kind of change where you put those rest days based on how you need to kind of slice and dice your stuff to get a little bit more stimulus. And I'm not even completely against that. If I get into this PPL split and I notice a number of weeks in that I do feel that my back and my lateral delts, which I think are going to be the most common muscle groups that are going to feel like they're recovering faster than the others, I may find myself doing something exactly like that, adding 2 back sets here or there, taking a couple lateral delt sets, putting them here or there. And suddenly the split doesn't actually look like a PPL anymore, but its base is still kind of based in the PPL structure. And if you don't do that, if you were to just continue doing PPL with the rest days as designated by the way that I put them there, then that's also not the end of the world, because it sort of becomes a mini specialization cycle for the muscle groups that recover optimally on that curve. So in this case, it might be legs. You're just like, hey, this is a PPL split, but it's a leg specialization strictly based on how quickly these muscle groups are going to recover and when we train them again. So yeah, there's just a lot of freedom with the structure and a lot of different malleability and ways you can kind of configure it to optimize your individual needs.
Yeah, one thing we kind of broke up there for a little bit, so I want to make. Hopefully, I'm not repeating something you just said, but this is something that I will do kind of quite regularly with client programs. In how I like to add a little bit more like X's and O's of, let's say we have we're doing like a hamstring focus day and a quad focus day or something like that, but we want to get a little bit more quad focus in. What I'll do is we'll only do like 1 set of quads on the hamstring day or the hamstring focused day, but it will be like a highly, highly stimulative set. So it might be like a Widowmaker set on the leg press, like a heavy set for 20 reps where you have like 1 shot, give it everything you have. Fatigue is high, but stimulus is high, and then we move on, sort of thing. Or if we are potentially have like a lateral delt emphasis in this program, we need to then hit a little bit of an extra frequency. I don't want to give someone like 4 sets of lateral delts on a pull day because of the extra time, because there's obviously all these things we already want to hit there. So I might use like the cast set for medial delts, right? Something with like a very, very high. So something that I'll do with the lateral delt day, or to increase lateral delts on like a pull day, is we'll just implement a cast set, right? So and what that is, it's typically like they vary for I guess muscle group to muscle group, but it's something where you're going to hit like the shortened range, and then you're going to superset with like a lengthened range, and then after that you're going to go back to the exercise you did the shortened range for. But since you're so fatigued, you're not going to be able to reach the short position, so it's essentially like partials with that shortened exercise. In that one, it's a very, very short time commitment. Stimulus is very, very high. It's a very complete stimulus for a selected muscle group, because you're training the shortened range of the motion, you're training the lengthened range, and then also partials. So you do get a very, very robust kind of stimulus in a very short amount of time. And then like I said, it's something way that I like to add in additional volume for like specialized or focused muscle groups that is time efficient on other days.
Yeah, I love that. No, that's really good. And just as an example for somebody on the cast set, I used to do this with my quads a lot in a prior cycle. And so the example would be that you would do a leg extension set, full range of motion, and then you would go to sissy squats, which are just prioritizing the lengthened range of motion. And then you'd go back to the leg extension using the same weight that you used on the first set. But now, because you essentially did the first set, then you did the sissy squats, and then when you go back to the leg extension, you can't actually get full range of motion reps. So even though you're trying to get full range of motion reps, they essentially turn into these like lengthened partials at the bottom. And so the same thing can be applied to like the example Aaron used with lateral delts. It might be something like a dumbbell lateral raise into a wrist height cable lateral raise, and then right back to the dumbbells. But now the dumbbells are just kind of like these bottom reps because you're too fatigued to get the full range of motion. So yeah, that type of cast set or whatever is fantastic, and a great use of a way to get a stimulus without a whole ton of time commitment, or I guess energy beyond, that very concise focused work.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the other critiques, a con, I would say, of the PPL split is that because you're doing this homogeneous combination of muscle groups where it's your entire push structure or it's your entire pull structure, that whatever muscle groups are going to be put second in that setup are going to sort of get the shaft or be a little bit deprioritized. And so what I mean by that is if you do a bunch of back work, then your biceps are going to be taxed from the back work. And so you go to do your bicep work and you kind of underperform on what you would do if the biceps were placed first. Or in a different example, if you had done chest work and then put biceps after chest, there would be no overlapping fatigue or minimal. And so the biceps would potentially be able to perform better. And then you have that same issue on your push days, where once you do your chest work, which involves a lot of pressing usually, and then you get into your tricep work, your triceps are already going to be taxed from the chest work. You could say the same thing about shoulders, except for the most part, people tend to be veering away from doing pressing movements for shoulders these days. So I don't know that there's as much negative carryover if you're going from chest pressing to different like Y raise and lateral raise variations. But yeah, if you have pressing work in there, that's going to be the same deal, where if you start with chest and you're exhausting your front delts and your triceps from a bunch of chest pressing, then when you get into your overhead press or your anterior delt press type movement, there's going to be a lot of fatigue that's already built up there as well. And that would be different if you were going pull muscle groups and then to shoulders or something along those lines. And so that is a con, at least initially in my mind, but I think that it could also be framed as a pro, given that you won't need as much volume potentially for these smaller muscle groups like your triceps and biceps, because they already receive some stimulus. And so here, getting into the nitty gritty of biomechanics a little bit, we know that pressing movements tend to primarily work the medial and the lateral head of the triceps, but they don't touch the long head at all. And so when you're looking at how you're going to structure your training in a push-pull leg split, it would make sense to say, okay, hey, my chest pressing movements and maybe my shoulder pressing movements are going to sufficiently work my medial and lateral heads of my tricep. So then when I get to the tricep work, I don't need to do movements for the medial and lateral head. I can focus more exclusively on just training the long head, maybe even at longer muscle lengths. And now the structure of the day might have like 2 chest exercises, 2 shoulder exercises, and only need 1 tricep exercise. Where conversely, if triceps were placed on back day, you might need 2 tricep exercises because the back work is going to get you a little bit of long head work, but it's not going to lengthen the long head or get you the same stimulus to the long head that you would by actually training it directly. So you're probably going to need a tricep movement for the medial / lateral head and one for the long head. And then kind of the same idea for the biceps, where doing pulling movements does kind of thoroughly train the biceps. I mean, it doesn't train them in flexion to the same degree that you get with actually curling. But scientific studies have shown over time, comparing bicep activation and a lat pull down, it seems to be a pretty large mover of that exercise. So there is a significant amount of bicep stimulus that takes place. And so then when you get to the end of your back work and your biceps are tired, yes, they may underperform on a specific amount of weight lifted parameter. Like you might be able to do more weight on your bicep curl if it was first. But at this point, I'm not so sure that really matters, because we know that the muscle really only knows tension. And if it's fatigued from the back work, then the tension that it receives from a bicep curl that's 5 or 10 pounds less is still going to be a significant magnitude of stimulus for the bicep. So what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously quite correct. I think that is one where knowing your goal, right, in instead of chasing performance in kind of your more isolations and smaller muscle groups that are later in parts of the day, like chasing the stimulus, right? What is the target muscle I'm attempting to do this for? And what I really liked that you brought up was the lengthened head of the tricep. Like once you identify, and it's not like you need to spend a lot of time identifying. You look up some stuff on Google, some charts or not charts, fucking images. You're like, okay, the long head is like, okay, on the inside, right? That's how I remember it. It's on the inside. Long is on the inside. And then as you're doing different movements, you can inside relative to like proximal side of your body, right? Like closer to your armpit. That's like your long head of your tricep. Yeah. So then like with those, like you can know like what to look for. And then when you're performing something, like where do you feel it? And like, am I getting a stimulus in this particular part that I'm like really, really trying for? Now, some things like the bicep from my personal experience, I can't really tell that much of a difference from like the long head of the bicep to the short head. But like with the tricep, like if something is really lighting up that long head, like I can feel a difference, Another thing is like with lateral delts and stuff, right? When you perform something like this is something I'll have clients do a lot, is like perform the set, right? Take it to your intended intensity and stuff. And then when you put the dumbbells down, whatever, like sit there for like 3 or 4 seconds and like, where do I feel the stimulus? Like, where is that fatigue? Where is that burn? Like identify, connect with your mind. Where is that? Is it in the spot that you want it to be? Right? If the answer is no, well, then we need to, reform movement, maybe pick a new movement sort of thing. But like, did I just place tension where I wanted to place tension? Like check in with yourself. If the answer is like, yes, great. Things are, you're providing stimulus to where you intend to provide stimulus.
Yep, totally. One thing that I think helps think about the long head as well is if the arm gets reached up overhead and it kind of stretches out the lat as you're doing your tricep movement, then that's likely the long head, because the long head is the only one that inserts on the other side of the shoulder joint. So it actually kind of inserts semi near where like the teres and the lat insert. And so anytime that you're stretching out or training the lat, you're sort of getting a little bit of long head in there. And anytime that you're directly training the long head, you're going to have a little bit of stretch in there on the lat as well. So getting that thing up overhead trying to stay in the scapular plane, but mostly just getting up overhead, I think, is the key to the long head. Whereas most of the medial and lateral stuff is going to be in front of your chest and here. So we're not getting that fully extended position overhead.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the other kind of things you can do to make this PPL split a little bit more even, if you're worried about the exercise order piece, is because it spans across two of these little like mini 5-day periods, or I guess PPL, and then there's a new exercise sequence for PPL. You could change which movements are first. So like I wouldn't do this on back day, because you really, I don't think, unless biceps are priority, you don't really want to be putting biceps before your back work. So I think in that case, the way that I would maneuver this would be lats become the priority on one of the pull days, and upper back or rear delts become the priority on the other pull day. So you kind of are able to prioritize different areas of the back that way. For the push day, I think you could easily have one day where you put your chest movements first, and you could have one day where you put your shoulder movements first. And then again, I wouldn't put your tricep stuff first unless triceps are really your priority. Or if you're doing if your shoulder and chest work on that tricep on that day don't involve pressing. So I could see a scenario where someone's like, okay, well, I want to switch up one of my push days and I'm going to put my triceps first, but my chest work is going to be a series of adduction, like fly type movements, not any pressing. And then my delt work is going to be a series of raises, whether it's Y raises or lateral raises. And now you essentially prioritize triceps, putting them first, but they're not having any mitigating impact on the result of your chest and shoulder work for that day. And then on your other push day, you can put your chest work and any like pressing shoulder work in. Or like I was saying, you could do pressing shoulder work first on one day and pressing chest work first on another day. And now you have kind of those two muscle groups prioritized. As far as legs, you already brought this up, but you can have one day that's more quad priority where those movements are placed first, and one day that's more hamstring priority where those movements are placed first. And you could even skew volume as well. You know, given the 5-day recovery curve, I don't think I'm going to do that this cycle, but usually I'm a fan of, hey, this is a hamstring dominant day and this is a quad dominant day. But usually when I do that, it's because I'm giving myself 3 or 4 days of recovery between sessions. When I'm getting 5 full days of recovery between, I'm actually going to keep the leg training more or less evenly split between both of those days. So that's definitely kind of another consideration in how you order your exercises on each of the days.
Yeah. One thing I think is really worth adding onto the back end of that, and this is something that I definitely find myself in right now, so it's very top of mind. If you are opting to not split the hamstring or quad volume off, and you're just going to keep volume equal and then train them every 5 days or whatever, that day is very, very fatiguing. The fatigue cost is astronomical relative to the other days, right? I don't think you can do enough chest volume in the world to get you the amount of fatigue that you would get from training like quads and hamstrings, then obviously like glutes and the core and the adductors and all these things that come along with just like axially loading, your lower body together, sort of thing. Like, so that's a big consideration of potentially, your life, other commitments, those sorts of things, what your sleep looks like, what your, overall capacity is it that I feel like is a very real trade-off that could make your life potentially significantly better.
Yeah, that's the main reason why when I designed this cycle, I initially put the rest day before the leg day and then another rest day after the leg day, so that you kind of use that first rest day to build the like angst and excitement for leg day, where you're not doing anything and you're just sitting there being like, man, this leg day tomorrow is going to smash. And then you do the leg day and you're crushed, and you have that recovery day afterwards to kind of get your head right again and initialize, no, that's not the right word, begin the process of really optimizing recovery so that you can get back to your next kind of 3 to 5 day rotational cycle through. And then the other thing this cycle that I'm doing slightly differently than others is, in prior iterations of this program, I've had 5 movements for legs. where usually there would be 3 for quads and 2 for hams on one day, and then 3 for hams and 2 for quads. But I always found that by the 5th exercise, I was really just over it, and I was kind of going through the motions at that point. And so this cycle, I've only designed it with 2 of each on each day. So 2 quads and 2 hams on each of the leg days. And I think that that's going to be just right, because I find that I usually can get enough focus, energy, motivation, and desire to work hard and prioritize 4 exercises. But that 5th one, for whatever reason, just seems to be overkill for me.
Yeah. And it simplifies the setup, right? I mean, you have 4 exercises, you're going to have a short overload, a lengthened overload, probably, right, for the quad, and then obviously again for the hamstring. So it does make your template or framework much more straightforward in terms of exercise choices.
Yeah, exactly. And so I like, to your point, this is kind of the final piece of our discussion here, is the implementation of short and lengthened movements in the structure of the program. And I think this is really mostly relevant to the leg days. There's just going to be enough recovery in there for the 2 different regions of the upper body, the push and the pull, that I don't think that the amount of lengthened or short movements you do is going to cause huge concern as far as recovery or stimulus or anything like that. I mean, as you guys know, I generally love the idea of going short movement and then lengthened movement in my structure for a variety of reasons that we've discussed on the podcast before. But especially for these leg days, it's really important, as you brought up, to have 1 short and 1 lengthened movement in most cases, because it's extremely daunting to try to do 2 lengthened movements. And to that point, I actually think that one of my quad days, I do have 2 lengthened movements. And that's mostly because I didn't want to put leg extensions in there twice when I only have 4 quad movements to use over the course of the 10-day microcycle. I didn't want to use 2 of those 4 quad movements as leg extensions. And so one of the days I do have 2 lengthened movements, but on that day, I make sure to have 1 short movement for the hamstrings. And I just go into it understanding that that's going to be a bit of a daunting day, and probably skew volume slightly lower to the quads when there's 2 lengthened movements versus the day where there's 1 lengthened movement. And so these are just going to kind of be things that we have to pay attention to and potentially be ready to adjust variables minimally, depending on how the body responds with soreness and recovery over the first few days or first few microcycles of the training program.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add onto the back of that one.
Cool. Yeah, I think that covers all of the notes that I had. If we missed anything that you guys are thinking of, send them in and we can attack them at the beginning of the next episode before we cover kind of my race day shenanigans.
Yeah. I think that one's going to be a lot of fun. And I guess like one thing I kind of didn't really say, like I really do like the push-pull legs program. I think it's something that everyone should run it at one point. It's very straightforward, which I do like. And the framework of it is so, it's a good structure. It makes a lot of decisions for you. And there's a lot of the things of nuance and maybe putting shoulders, before chest, if you're only going to do like adduction sort of things. Like there's a lot of room for you to modify things when you have a lot of knowledge and you want to get really, really fancy, but you can also like keep it really simple. And if I'm being honest, even with the information that I have from obviously all these talks with Bryan and stuff, like when I'm designing one, even for myself, like I'm still going to keep it pretty simple. Right. Yeah. And things are a little bit relative too. Like, for example, even though I don't really like training arms that much, like they're okay sized relative to my shoulders, like I don't need more arm volume. So like I'm okay with them taking that back seat and still getting that sort of training. I'm still going to prioritize it from the pressing movements, getting into like the shortened stuff, and then your ancillaries of maybe an anterior delt exercise and medial delt, tricep sort of thing. And you can set it up that way. And it will work wonderfully, right? Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to wrap up with that in case we potentially gave some of you guys a little bit too much information that you end up in like the analysis paralysis route there.
Yeah. I'll also say, just on the point of arms, because I think this is an interesting kind of side topic, is that over the course of my training career, like 25 plus years, I don't know if there's been a single cycle that I've run where I have put arms first. There may have been like a cycle here and there where I have an arm day. Very, very rarely, like of the 25 years, maybe one total year of the time I've had an arm day in my program, but almost all the time my arms are being trained as an afterthought after the compound movements. And I've even gone through years where I haven't trained my arms at all. I actually talked about this on Dr. Pack's post the other day, where he talked about arm training kind of as a tongue-in-cheek way of people being like, you don't need arms, you can just do compounds. And he was like, you do need arms if you want to grow arms. And I was saying, I was like, look, I didn't train arms for my first 3 years. Then I did train them for like 8 years. And then I didn't train them for another 8 years. And then I trained them for a couple more years after that. So I've really only been trained. I trained arms basically for like an 8-year period in the relative beginning, but not the very beginning. And then they just kind of have stayed. I mean, you and I both did CrossFit for years, where we didn't do a single direct arm set. We just did butterfly pull-ups and handstand push-ups and muscle ups and things like that. And I personally can say that I don't think my arms lost anything as a result of that time spent in CrossFit. So yeah, take that for what it is.
Yeah, that was a good aside to wrap up on.
Cool. Yeah, that's all we got, man. I guess we'll come back next week and have a race recap and whatever else comes in.
Yep, I'm excited to for that episode. Bryan, best of luck with the race upcoming. And like you said, we'll cover it on next week's episode.